There is an increasing dialogue surrounding sustainability in contemporary society, yet much of this discourse occurs externally. Individuals discuss carbon emissions, systems, consumption patterns, waste management, materials, and efficiency. These discussions are significant. However, underlying these topics, a more subtle human inquiry may be surfacing, one that is less about logistics and more about psychological aspects. What type of inner existence is fostered by perpetual excess? This pertains not only to material excess, but also to cognitive, emotional, and informational excess. It encompasses the sensation of perpetually bearing too much, an overload of decisions, possessions, inputs, and various forms of unseen maintenance. For numerous individuals, life has become congested in ways that are challenging to express clearly, not necessarily in a dramatic sense, merely dense. Moreover, as modern culture frequently equates abundance with freedom, individuals may persist in amassing experiences, options, devices, obligations, subscriptions, ambitions, and identities long after their nervous systems have quietly ceased to feel spacious within. What becomes intriguing is that some individuals eventually start to shift in the opposite direction, not necessarily towards minimalism as a style, but towards a more mindful relationship with what enters their lives and what remains. Often, the impetus for this shift is not rooted in moral performance, it is about finding relief. The understanding that sustainability may encompass not only the preservation of external environments, but also the safeguarding of internal conditions necessary for clarity, focus, rest, and emotional equilibrium. This is because there may be a form of fatigue induced by unsustainable lifestyles that cannot be remitted through productivity alone. And perhaps conscious living commences when an individual begins to pose a different question, not how much can I handle, but what kind of life enables me to maintain an inner spaciousness while living it? The current discourse is fundamentally an exploration of that question. Not sustainability as a means of branding or identity, but rather sustainability as a psychological environment. It represents a more subdued and deliberate form of luxury, grounded in the concepts of sufficiency, coherence, and the capacity to exist without the persistent sensation of internal congestion. When individuals encounter the term sustainability, discussions frequently shift to external factors, patterns of consumption, environmental systems, ethical considerations, and social responsibility. However, I ponder whether there exists a profoundly personal aspect of sustainability that is often overlooked. Many individuals today appear to be psychologically stretched thin, even when their lives seem to function adequately on the surface. An unseen fatigue can arise not only from professional commitments, but also from juggling excessive inputs, numerous obligations, and the multiple layers of contemporary existence all at once. Do you believe that part of the modern desire for simplicity or intentional living is, in fact, a yearning for inner spaciousness, a lifestyle that allows the mind and nervous system to engage more gently?
Indeed, I believe that the concept of longing is becoming more prominent, even if individuals do not always articulate it in such terms. Many people are not merely fatigued physically, they are also mentally overwhelmed. Contemporary existence inundates our consciousness daily with a vast array of inputs, information, choices, communication, opportunities for consumption, social comparisons, and a pervasive sense of urgency. Much of this accumulation occurs so gradually that individuals adapt without fully acknowledging the emotional toll it takes. However, the nervous system still bears this weight. A person may seem organized on the outside while feeling internally congested. This is not due to any single obligation being excessively burdensome, but rather because life has become layered with ongoing maintenance tasks. There are countless matters to monitor, respond to, update, manage, remember, and preserve. Ultimately, the mind loses its sense of spaciousness. I believe this is why some individuals instinctively gravitate towards more mindful ways of living, not necessarily driven by ideology, but rather in search of psychological breathing space. They desire fewer unnecessary choices, fewer fragmented responsibilities, fewer forms of invisible distractions that continuously demand attention. What becomes intriguing, that spaciousness often has little correlation with traditional notions of wealth. A person may have external abundance while feeling internally constricted at all times. Conversely, someone who lives more intentionally may find greater tranquility simply because their life is characterized by more coherence and less superfluity. I also contend that modern culture frequently equates stimulation with richness. However, richness and saturation are not synonymous. At a certain juncture, excess begins to detract from experience rather than enhance it. Attention becomes scattered, presence diminishes. The self feels perpetually interrupted by the demands of life itself. Thus, I assert that conscious living increasingly signifies a quest for sustainability, the level of consciousness, not only inquiring about what the planet is capable of sustaining, but also considering what the human mind can endure without sacrificing clarity, tranquility, and profundity. This may explain why the concept of restraint appears to hold renewed significance at this moment. It is not viewed as a form of deprivation, but rather as a safeguard for one's inner space.
There appears to be a subtle cultural pressure for perpetual expansion. Individuals are urged to consistently optimize, continuously gather experiences, maintain strong connections, enhance optionality, seek greater visibility, increase productivity, consume more, and pursue additional stimulation. As this momentum becomes socially normalized, it may become challenging to discern when the pursuit of more has ceased to enhance the quality of life itself. I ponder whether numerous individuals unconsciously structure their lives around accumulation, while inwardly yearning for respite from the very density they are perpetually generating.
I believe that contradiction is profoundly present at this time. Numerous individuals are engaging in types of accumulation that no longer provide nourishment, yet the cultural mindset continues to link expansion with success and security. Consequently, there is a propensity to keep adding to schedules, identities, responsibilities, possessions, ambitions even when the emotional rewards have begun to wane. Moreover, since modern systems incentivize visible activity, accumulation often seems rational from an external perspective. The challenge lies in the fact that each addition leaves a psychological mark. Every item demands attention, every obligation takes up mental space, every digital platform extends cognitive engagement outward, every aspiration necessitates new emotional upkeep. On their own, these elements may appear manageable. However, together they create a sense of density, and density alters the atmosphere of consciousness. Individuals start to feel perpetually occupied internally, even during times meant for relaxation. The mind remains slightly encumbered by unresolved tasks, latent responsibilities, and constant stimulation. I believe many people silently yearn for relief from this state, yet find it difficult to envision an alternative way of living. Excess has become culturally normalized. Simplicity can even seem irresponsible or inadequate within systems structured around relentless expansion. However, eventually, some individuals begin to realize that the quality of life is not solely defined by what enters their experience. It is also influenced by what is consciously excluded from it. This understanding transforms the emotional significance of sustainability. Sustainability evolves from being merely a moral guideline to becoming a psychological one. It prompts the question, what modes of living enable attention to remain sufficiently clear for life to feel livable? What degree of consumption continues to enable emotional spaciousness? What rhythm still permits the nervous system to rejuvenate itself? These inquiries are profoundly human, for there reaches a moment when abundance devoid of spaciousness ceases to feel opulent. It becomes burdensome.
In your personal observations, what changes typically occur internally when an individual starts to cultivate a more conscious and sustainable relationship with their life, not necessarily adopting an extreme minimalist approach? but rather becoming more intentional about what they permit into their focus, surroundings, timetable, and emotional landscape.
One of the initial transformations frequently observed is a decrease in internal friction. Life starts to feel less psychologically congested. There are fewer competing demands for simultaneous attention, which makes presence more readily accessible once again. Individuals often characterize this not as excitement, but rather as relief, a calmer nervous system. The mind is no longer burdened with processing constant excess, allowing perception to become less constricted. Minor experiences regain their visibility, thought processes become less reactive. Rest becomes more rejuvenating as consciousness is no longer perpetually overloaded. Another significant change is the deepening of intentionality. When individuals cease automatic accumulation, they begin to engage with their choices more consciously. They start to question whether something truly adds meaning or merely increases volume. Over time, this profoundly alters emotional experiences. Relationships become more attentive. Consumption becomes less compulsive. Time appears less fragmented. Even physical surroundings start to influence mood differently, as the individual becomes more attuned to the psychological atmosphere. I also believe that individuals rediscover a sense of enoughness. Contemporary culture conditions desire to remain perpetually outwardly extended. There is always another improvement to pursue, another acquisition to make, another optimization to achieve. However, conscious living often gently interrupts that momentum, not by dismissing beauty or comfort, but by loosening the belief that more automatically equates to a better life. Once that belief begins to weaken, spaciousness naturally arises. There is increased internal space for reflection, silence, emotional clarity, and sustained attention. In many respects, sustainable living transforms into sustainable feeling. It becomes a mode of existence that does not continuously deplete the self.
What are your thoughts on the most common misconceptions people have regarding restraint in contemporary society? Restraint is frequently perceived as a form of limitation, reduction, or deficiency. However, I ponder whether specific types of restraint may actually foster a distinct kind of freedom, particularly on a psychological level.
I believe that restraint is frequently misinterpreted, as modern culture often portrays freedom mainly as unrestricted access, an abundance of options, increased stimulation, greater acquisition, immediate gratification. However, from a psychological perspective, unlimited access can lead to fatigue. In the absence of deliberate boundaries, attention becomes scattered indefinitely, desire proliferates incessantly. The mind loses its sense of balance because it is perpetually exposed to more than it can effectively assimilate. When consciously chosen, restraint can restore a sense of coherence. It establishes clarity around experiences. An individual becomes more adept at engaging deeply, as life is not perpetually inundated with excessive inputs and obligations. Furthermore, I believe that restraint safeguards sensitivity. When consumption is incessant, be it informational, emotional, or material, the nervous system gradually diminishes in its subtlety. Experiences require greater intensity to evoke emotional recognition. However, restraint recalibrates one's perception. Ordinary experiences regain their richness, as consciousness is no longer in a state of constant saturation. Perhaps most crucially, restraint fosters trust within oneself. An individual no longer feels entirely controlled by impulse, comparison, or external pressures. There exists a stronger alignment between one's values and daily existence. This alignment cultivates a sense of calm, not an overwhelming calm, but rather a more serene internal relationship with life. Thus, restraint does not inherently signify a lack of freedom. At times, it is precisely what enables freedom to remain emotionally sustainable.
What are your thoughts on why psychological spaciousness is perceived as increasingly luxurious in contemporary society? This luxury is not related to status, but rather to the profound sensation that one's inner existence retains the capacity to breathe, contemplate, and maintain coherence, even amidst the complexities of modern living.
Due to the rarity of spaciousness, currently, most individuals exist within a state of constant cognitive engagement. Attention is perpetually drawn outward, schedules are packed, digital spaces are always active, and even periods of relaxation are often filled with additional stimuli. Thus, when an individual encounters true psychological spaciousness, it is profoundly rejuvenating. There exists a luxury in having sufficient inner tranquility to clearly hear one's own thoughts once more. A luxury in not feeling perpetually rushed internally. A luxury in awakening without the immediate burden of cognitive overload already looming at the periphery of awareness. I believe that people are increasingly coming to understand that mere abundance does not equate to peace. In certain instances, unmanaged abundance leads to fragmentation instead. Spaciousness arises from balance, from lives meticulously crafted, so that the nervous system can engage with experiences rather than constantly shielding itself from excess. And this spaciousness subtly transforms everything. Attention becomes more profound. Conversations decelerate. Beauty becomes more apparent. Presence requires less effort as consciousness is not perpetually congested. In this regard, conscious living evolves into a form of emotional architecture. It is not about structuring life around endless growth, but rather around the sustainability of existence.
What becomes less burdensome when an individual ceases to structure their life, mainly around accumulation, and instead starts to organize it around sustainability, clarity, and sufficiency?
I believe that one aspect that becomes less burdensome is the pressure to constantly demonstrate external fulfillment. Individuals no longer feel as driven to construct their identity solely through accumulation, as their internal perception of value evolves. Additionally, there is a reduction in fragmentation. When life is stripped of superfluous layers, attention becomes more cohesive. The mind expends less energy on managing excess and more on genuinely experiencing life. This often leads to emotional stability, not because challenges vanish, but because the self is no longer burdened by a constant, invisible overload. I also perceive that comparison diminishes. Various forms of comparison are exacerbated by environments centered on relentless consumption and visibility. However, when the concept of enoughness becomes emotionally tangible, the external drive for escalation gives some of its psychological power. People start to pose different inquiries. Instead of asking, "How much more can I acquire?" they begin to ask, "What enables life to remain clear, meaningful, and sustainable from within?" This transformation also alters the pace of life. There is a decrease in compulsive urgency, accompanied by a greater willingness to safeguard rest, silence, attention, and relationships from unnecessary disruptions. Perhaps the lightest aspect is the connection between the self and existence itself. Life no longer feels like a constant race against the nervous system. It becomes more livable once again.
If an individual were to take a moment to observe the emotional climate of their existence, not merely the possessions or accomplishments they have attained, but the genuine sensations of their inner self, while navigating through all that they have created, what insights do you believe they might start to uncover?
I believe they may start to perceive the distinction between fullness and overcrowding, the contrast between a life filled with meaning and one that merely holds volume. Moreover, they might come to understand that sustainability encompasses not just the preservation of external resources, but also the maintenance of conditions essential for presence, clarity, tenderness, and emotional equilibrium within themselves. They could observe where life seems unnecessarily heavy, where attention has been stretched too thin, where noise has supplanted depth. Yet, along with this awareness, there may also be a sense of relief. For spaciousness often emerges in a very subtle manner, through reduction, through gentleness, through a heightened awareness of what is permitted to continuously inhabit the inner world. And perhaps that is the profound luxury many individuals are currently seeking, not an escape from life, but a mode of existence that allows sufficient space within consciousness to genuinely feel alive while engaging in it.
Sustainability, at its core, may not solely be an environmental concept. It also encompasses an emotional aspect. It raises the question of whether our lifestyle permits the mind, body, and inner self to maintain sufficient space for clarity, focus, and tranquility to thrive within it. Ultimately, the burden of excess often outweighs its benefits. Furthermore, contemporary luxury might not be defined by the quantity of possessions amassed, but rather by the intentionality with which life is crafted, ensuring that existence remains breathable from the inside.